Hello, welcome back again. My topic today is another philosophical video, and I'm feeling somewhat inspired by the scenery here in Wisconsin to talk a little bit about Heidegger and his concept of death, authenticity, and time. So the basic way in which the concept of authenticity gets going in Heidegger is through the awareness of one's death. Of course, the concept has broader ramifications in as much as part of our very being is structured by the notion of care. That is, we have a relationship of care toward the world, the German word there being Sorge. So in as much as we're related to the world by a caring mood or attitude, our consciousness of our own death and authenticity all play a role in that caring. So, for Heidegger, the concept of authenticity is something that he opposes to the contrasting idea of being lost in the they self, which is often put in quotation marks. T-H-E-Y, the they. Now, the concept of a they is quite similar to the notion of an other, which is a concept that appears in a lot of existential thought. It's certainly an idea that appears in works of Derrida, and various philosophers have talked about the concept of a gaze, the gaze of the other. But for our purposes, the self and the other, the authentic self and the they self, are contrasted in a certain relationship. That is, the self can get lost in the they, and so lose track of its authentic sense of itself. I feel like, from this standpoint, getting lost in the they self chimes with some themes that go very deep, that have roots that go very deep in the history of philosophy, specifically with the Socratic notion of knowing oneself. And I suppose you could venture out into thinking that Socrates embodies a certain kind of authenticity, in as much as if anyone did not get lost in the they, it was Socrates. Socrates followed his own inner light. He followed the promptings of what he took to be a divine inspiration. But not only that, he followed the promptings of reason. And with those promptings together, he put together what could be considered a radically authentic life in quite an independent sense. He followed the light of reason as well as the light of inspiration in a way that was rooted in his soul. But let me describe a little bit more about this concept of the they, or getting lost in the they. I oftentimes think about this idea in connection with the experience of looking for parking at a shopping mall. It's not something that I do very often, but I've had the experience in various shopping malls, some of them in California, where there will be hundreds of cars. Sometimes there will be a wait for a half hour or more just to get into the parking lot at certain times of the year. And giant parking structures, and everyone is just kind of going about their business in this kind of way that just sort of looks like they're all following the same program. They're all following the same routine. Now, in a certain sense, just going with the program or getting lost in the routine, doing something because that's what everyone else is doing, there's an aspect of conventionality behind it. I'm not saying that going shopping at a mall is necessarily a bad thing, but it's kind of a way of gaining an insight into what it means to be lost in the they. It means to be kind of driving on autopilot without a sense of why one is driving or where one is driving. And authenticity gains a more acute sense of its importance when it's coupled with the idea of death. Because at a certain point, it becomes more and more vital to answer those questions as we're taking different directions. In order for them to be meaningful to us, they need to be grounded in our sense of our authentic self. And that idea takes us very close to what later existentialist philosophers discussed in relationship to bad faith and needing to face the circumstances of one's existence in order to arrive at an authentic standpoint. Because it's only from that authentic standpoint that one's existence becomes authentically meaningful. And perhaps there's even a way, and I might be reaching a little bit on this point as I just put the thought together, but there's perhaps a way in which this notion of authenticity could be considered a kind of top layer of Dasein, a kind of guiding sail on the mast, if you will, on the boat of Dasein. So Dasein, a concept, refers to the idea of simply being there. And that's Heidegger's reinterpretation of the metaphysical notion of being, the classical notion of being as it was discussed in Aristotelian metaphysics, Platonic metaphysics, scholastic metaphysics, etc., in which the concept was never really very well grounded, but had an analogous relationship was characterized by the analogous relationship between various different categories of being. I don't want to start getting too technical here, but Aristotle had 10 categories of being: substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, and position. And those were all modes of being. They're not categories that make up the concept of being in the same way that different species of dogs make up the genus of dogs. Instead, there's merely an analogical relationship between the category of being, for example, or rather the category of substance, and the category of relation. One is like the other insofar as they share a certain relationship to being. So the concept of being itself, with this amorphous, ill-defined underpinning, became a problem for those who are working in the classical philosophical tradition. But what Heidegger does is he reinterprets the notion of being in terms of Dasein. And what that accomplishes is that it takes this vague concept and, in a sense, concretizes it in our own lived experience. Because what Dasein is simply being there. It's our experience of existing in the world. And so, in a sense, what I'm reaching for here is that the achievement of authenticity could be considered to be kind of a higher part of what ontologically structures our being in the world. At the very top of that mast of structures, the one that, so to speak, crowns it, gives our life direction, purpose, with the attitude of care and consciousness of death. Underneath it is a sense of authentic engagement with the world and not simply being lost in the world. And I will end it there.